My daughter took my villa and gave it to her husband's family, saying, "Now it's theirs. You're not allowed to come here." I smiled and nodded, hiding my anger, but when they came to move in, I prepared a surprise for them that they would never forget. They were shocked by what they saw. Betrayal turned into revenge, where justice struck from an unexpected direction, changing everything forever. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. I slammed the car door and grabbed my weekend bag, already picturing the quiet hours ahead by the lake. 3 days of peace at my villa, exactly what I needed after another exhausting week of managing the San Diego properties. The 2-hour drive from the city had been worth it just to see Lake Tahoe's crystal waters again. But something was wrong. 2 figures in white bathrobes stood on my private terrace, coffee mugs steaming in their hands. My daughter Kelly leaned against the railing, her dark hair catching the afternoon sun. Behind her, a man I recognized as her husband Palmer shifted uncomfortably when he spotted me. "What the hell?" I muttered, my bag slipping from suddenly numb fingers. Kelly straightened, her face hardening into an expression I'd never seen before. Not even during her worst teenage years had she looked at me with such cold dismissal. "Dad, you can't stay here," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Palmer and I are planning a romantic weekend." I blinked, certain I'd misheard. This was my villa. The deed had my name on it, bought with money I'd earned building half the commercial district in San Diego. Elizabeth and I had picked out every tile, every fixture, every piece of furniture. "But Kelly, this is my villa," I started, my voice trailing off as the absurdity of having to state this obvious fact hit me. "I don't care." She set her mug down with a sharp clink. "We were here first, and we're not leaving." Palmer mumbled something I couldn't catch, but Kelly waved him off. Her bathrobe fell open slightly, and she pulled it tighter with an angry jerk. "Honey, I drove 2 hours," I said, taking a tentative step toward the front door. "I just wanted to spend the weekend." "Get out of here and don't bother us." Kelly's voice rose to a shout. "You're just in the way anyway." The words hit me like a physical blow. In the way, this was my property, my retreat, the place where Elizabeth and I had planned to grow old together, where I came to feel close to her memory. I stood there, bag at my feet, staring at my only child as she glared at me from the terrace of my own home. Palmer looked everywhere except at me, his face flushed red above his bathrobe collar. 28 years old, and Kelly was ordering me off my own property like I was some unwanted stranger. The girl who used to climb into my lap for bedtime stories, who'd called me daddy until she turned 16, who'd sobbed in my arms at her mother's funeral. Elizabeth's voice whispered in my memory, "Be patient with her, Fred. She's still processing the grief. Give her time." 3 years. I'd given her 3 years of patience, of understanding, of bending over backward to accommodate her moods and demands. And this was what it had gotten me. "Fine," I heard myself say, the word tasting like ash. "Fine, I'll go." I bent to pick up my bag, my knees creaking with the motion. 62 years old, and my own daughter was treating me like dirt on her shoes. "Good," Kelly called out. "Next time, call first." "Next time, call first? To use my own property?" I walked back to my car on unsteady legs, each step feeling like a retreat from some battlefield I hadn't even known I was supposed to fight on. Behind me, I heard Kelly's voice, softer now, talking to Palmer about their plans for dinner. The engine turned over with a smooth purr. German engineering, reliable as always. Unlike family, apparently. I backed out of the driveway, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. In my rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of Kelly and Palmer, settling back into their chairs on the terrace, already dismissing my existence. My daughter raised her coffee mug in what might have been a toast, or might have been a final goodbye. The road back to San Diego stretched ahead, empty and long. I'd be driving home in defeat, tail between my legs, just like Elizabeth always worried I would, just like I always did. Monday evening found me in my study, nursing lukewarm coffee and the remnants of a solitary dinner. 3 days had crawled by since Friday's humiliation at the villa. Saturday I'd jumped every time the phone rang, expecting Kelly to call with some explanation. Sunday brought the uncomfortable realization that maybe I was always too quick to surrender. The phone's shrill ring cut through my thoughts. Dad? Kelly's voice carried none of the warmth I'd desperately hoped for. Cold, businesslike. Listen carefully. Palmer and I have decided. The villa now belongs to his parents. My coffee mug froze halfway to my lips. What? Kelly, what are you talking about? Carl and Margaret Thompson. It's their home now. Her words dropped like stones into still water. You're forbidden from going there anymore. The leather chair creaked as I sat forward. Kelly, have you lost your mind? You can't just take my property. Actually, I can, and I am. Her voice sharpened to a blade's edge. You hardly use it anyway, and they desperately need proper housing. 30 years of 12-hour days building my construction business flashed through my mind. Every permit fight, every difficult client, every sacrifice Elizabeth and I had made to afford that dream home by the lake. It's my villa, the words exploded out of me with surprising force. I worked 3 decades to buy that place. Kelly's laugh held no humor. You're being ridiculously selfish. After everything we've done for you since Mom died. Something snapped. Everything you've done for me? My voice rose to match hers. I paid for your wedding, your car, your college loans, that fancy apartment deposit. That's what fathers do, she cut me off. Besides, you're old and alone now. What do you possibly need with such a big villa? Old and alone. The phrase hit like a physical blow, but instead of crumpling, I felt something harden inside my chest. Elizabeth's gentle voice whispered from memory about patience, but Elizabeth had never heard her daughter speak with such calculated cruelty. Those are Palmer's parents, Kelly, complete strangers to me. They're family now, and unlike you, they'll actually appreciate what they're getting. My grip tightened on the phone until my knuckles went white. No. Silence stretched between us. I could practically hear her surprise crackling through the connection. What did you just say? I said no, Kelly. The answer is no. You can't say no to me. That villa is wasted on you anyway. Her composure finally cracked, revealing something ugly underneath. Palmer's parents have been struggling financially, and you're just hoarding property you barely visit. The irony burned. I'd been visiting more frequently since Elizabeth's death, seeking comfort in the place where we'd been happiest. Kelly knew this perfectly well. They can find their own housing solutions, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. I can't believe how selfish you've become. Kelly's voice climbed toward hysteria. Mom would be ashamed of you. That crossed every line. Elizabeth would never have supported this theft, this manipulation of a grieving husband's love for his only child. Your mother would be horrified by what you've become, I said quietly. Kelly's intake of breath was audible. How dare you? I hung up. For the first time in 3 years, I had hung up on my daughter. The phone sat silent in my lap as my heart hammered against my ribs. Outside, San Diego's evening traffic hummed its familiar rhythm, but inside my study, everything had changed. The phone rang again immediately. Kelly's name flashed on the display. I turned it off. Sleep remained elusive that night. I sat in my leather chair until well past midnight, replaying every word of Kelly's outrageous demand. The silence in my study felt different now, not peaceful but charged with possibility. By morning, something fundamental had shifted inside me. Tuesday brought clarity with the sunrise. I made coffee, retrieved my laptop, and began researching property law with the methodical precision that had built my construction empire. California statutes, transfer requirements, documentation needs, information I'd learned decades ago but never imagined needing against my own daughter. The phone buzzed with text messages throughout the day. Kelly, of course. Dad, we need to talk about yesterday. Then, don't be stubborn about this. Finally, Palmer's parents are coming to see the villa this weekend. I deleted each message without responding. Wednesday morning, I drove to my attorney's office downtown. Marcus Chen had handled my business transactions for 15 years, a sharp mind wrapped in diplomatic courtesy. His corner office overlooked the harbor, floor-to-ceiling windows framing sailboats that danced across the bay. Fred. Marcus rose from behind his mahogany desk, extending a firm handshake. Good to see you. How can I help? I settled into the familiar client chair, the leather still creaking in exactly the same spot as always. I need to discuss property protection strategies. Marcus raised an eyebrow, but remained professionally neutral. Commercial or residential? Residential, the Lake Tahoe villa. I paused, choosing my words carefully. Someone is attempting to claim ownership rights they don't possess. Family member? The question hit like a diagnosis I wasn't ready to hear. Yes. Marcus nodded slowly, his expression growing more serious. That complicates things. Family disputes over property can get messy quickly. What are my options? Several. Marcus pulled out a legal pad, his pen already moving. First, we ensure your ownership documentation is ironclad. Second, we can establish additional protective measures. Trusts, LLC structures, whatever makes sense for your situation. How quickly? Depends on complexity. Basic documentation review. A few days. More sophisticated protection. 2 to 3 weeks. I thought about Kelly's text message. Palmer's parents coming this weekend. I may not have that long. Marcus set down his pen, studying my face with the intensity that made him excellent at reading clients and juries alike. Fred, is someone trying to force you off your own property? The question hung between us like an accusation. When I nodded, Marcus's professional demeanor hardened into something more personal. Then we start immediately. I'll need copies of all deeds, transfer documents, anything related to the property's ownership history. I can have everything to you by tomorrow morning. Good. Marcus made another note. And Fred? Document everything. Conversations, threats, attempts at coercion. Contemporary records matter in these situations. Threats. Coercion. That legal terms for what my daughter had tried to do to me. The elevator descended toward the parking garage, each floor marking my distance from the life I'd known just days ago. At the lobby level, my reflection caught in the polished steel doors. A man who looked older than his 62 years, but with something new in his eyes, determination. My phone rang as I reached the car. Kelly again. This time I answered. Finally! Her voice carried the sharp edge of someone accustomed to getting her way. We need to resolve this childish nonsense. The only nonsense, I said calmly, is your belief that you can steal my property. Steal? How dare you use that word with me? What would you call taking someone's home without permission? Kelly's pause lasted longer than usual. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted to something more calculated. Dad, Palmer's parents really are struggling financially. Margaret lost her job last month, and Carl's pension barely covers their rent. A manipulation technique I recognize from her teenage years. Appeal to sympathy when demands failed. That's unfortunate, but it doesn't give them rights to my villa. You could be generous. Show some family spirit. Like the family spirit you showed me Friday at the villa? Another pause. We were surprised to see you there. At my own property. You should have called first. The circular logic was dizzying. Kelly, I'm not giving anyone my villa. That's final. Fine! Her voice cracked like a whip. But Palmer's parents are still coming to look at it this Saturday. They've already made travel arrangements. The line went dead. I stood beside my car, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone. Above me, San Diego's afternoon sky stretched endless and blue, the same sky that had watched me build everything I owned through decades of honest work. Saturday was 4 days away. The dial tone continued its mechanical hum, while I sat frozen in my leather chair, phone still pressed against my ear. Kelly's words echoed in the sudden silence. Palmer's parents are still coming to look at it this Saturday. Look at it, as if my villa were already theirs. Slowly, I lowered the phone and set it on the side table, next to my forgotten coffee mug. The liquid had gone cold hours ago, a thin film forming across its dark surface. Outside, San Diego's evening traffic provided its familiar soundtrack, but inside my study, everything felt different. How long had this been happening? When exactly had I stopped being Kelly's father and become her personal bank account? The memories came flooding back with painful clarity. Kelly's wedding 2 years ago, she'd called it needing help with expenses, but I'd written a check for $15,000 without even asking for a budget breakdown. The casual way she'd accepted it, like I was an ATM dispensing expected cash, rather than her father making a significant sacrifice. Then Palmer's car troubles, 8 months later. Dad, we really need reliable transportation, Kelly had said. Her voice carrying that particular tone I'd learned meant another request was coming. $25,000 for a brand new SUV, purchased and delivered within a week. Palmer had shaken my hand with enthusiasm, but Kelly had barely looked up from her phone when I'd handed over the keys. Elizabeth's voice whispered from memory. "Be patient with her, Fred. She's still processing losing me." But Elizabeth had been dead for 3 years now, and Kelly's processing had morphed into something else entirely. Something that looked suspiciously like calculated exploitation of a grieving father's desperate need to maintain connection with his only child. I stood up from my chair, legs stiff from sitting motionless for too long. My study walls displayed decades of business achievements, awards, photographs with clients, framed contracts from major construction projects, evidence of a man who'd built an empire through careful negotiation and strategic thinking. So why had I become such a pushover in my personal life? The answer sat in a silver frame on my desk. Elizabeth's photograph taken during our last vacation to the villa. She was laughing at something I'd said, her gray hair catching the Lake Tahoe sunlight. In the 3 years since her death, I'd said yes to every one of Kelly's demands, terrified that saying no might drive away the last family I had left. But family didn't steal from each other. Family didn't manipulate grief into financial opportunity. Kelly's graduate school expenses had totaled nearly $40,000 over 2 years. I'd paid every bill without question, even when she'd switched majors twice and extended her program. Her thank you calls had grown shorter and less frequent, eventually disappearing altogether except when she needed something else. Pattern recognition, a skill that had served me well in construction bidding wars and contract negotiations. Apply the same analytical approach to Kelly's behavior, and the pattern became crystal clear. Each request had been larger than the last. Each expression of gratitude had been smaller. Each interaction had felt more transactional, less personal. I'd thought I was being a good father. Instead, I'd been training her to see me as a resource, rather than a person. The wall clock chimed 8 o'clock, its sound sharp in the quiet room. Palmer's parents would arrive at my villa in 4 days, expecting to claim ownership of a property I'd spent 30 years earning. They'd probably brought measuring tape and furniture catalogs, already planning how to rearrange my life's work to suit their comfort. Elizabeth's advice about patience had been sound when Kelly was genuinely grieving, but grief didn't last 3 years. Grief didn't plot to steal property from the person who'd provided endless financial support. Grief didn't hang up on a father after demanding he surrender his home to strangers. This wasn't grief anymore. This was greed. I picked up Elizabeth's photograph, studying her familiar smile. She'd loved Kelly deeply, but she'd also been the disciplinarian in our household. Elizabeth would never have tolerated this level of disrespect, this casual dismissal of my rights and feelings. "What would you want me to do?" I asked her image quietly. The answer came immediately, in my own voice rather than hers. "Stop being a victim." Sleep proved impossible. I'd gone through my usual bedtime routine: shower, teeth, the sports section from Sunday's paper. But when my head hit the pillow at 11, my mind refused to quiet. Instead of sheep, I found myself counting days. Monday, April 28th, Tuesday the 29th, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, May 4th. 6 days. By midnight, I'd abandoned any pretense of rest. Lying flat on my back, hands clasped behind my head, I stared at the ceiling and let my mind work the problem like I used to work construction contracts. Break down the components. Identify the critical path. Calculate resources and timeline. Kelly had made a crucial tactical error. She'd given me an exact deadline. In 30 years of project management, I'd learned that the client who reveals their timeline first usually loses the negotiation. Sunday, May 4th, meant she was working backward from some fixed constraint, probably Palmer's parents' moving schedule or lease expiration. The digital clock glowed 12:47 a.m. when the solution framework began forming. This wasn't about emotion anymore. This was about strategy, and strategy was something I understood. Every difficult client, every impossible deadline, every contractor who'd tried to squeeze me for extra money, they'd all taught me valuable lessons about human nature and leverage points. Rule 1. Never negotiate from desperation. Kelly assumed I was desperate to preserve our relationship, which had been true for 3 years, but desperate men don't hang up on their daughters. Desperate men don't hire attorneys. Rule 2. Information advantage wins deals. Kelly thought she knew everything about me, the grieving widower who couldn't say no to his daughter's demands. She had no idea about my conversation with Marcus Chen, no knowledge of the documentation review already underway. Rule 3. Timing determines everything. 6 days felt rushed from her perspective, probably leaving little room for contingency planning. From my perspective, 6 days was plenty of time to prepare something elegant. I thought about Frank Morrison, the developer who'd tried to muscle me out of the Harbor District project back in '98. Morrison had used intimidation tactics, threatening legal action, spreading rumors about my company's reliability. Sound familiar? I'd let him think his strategies were working while quietly securing contracts with 3 of his biggest subcontractors. When his project timeline collapsed, I'd been ready with solutions. At premium rates, the parallel was almost perfect. Kelly thought she was pressuring me into surrender. Instead, she was giving me time to build the perfect trap. My phone buzzed with a text message. Kelly again, of course. Dad, Palmer's parents found a moving company for Sunday. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. The presumption was breathtaking. She'd already arranged movers for my property. The sheer audacity actually impressed me from a business perspective. Always act as if the deal is already closed, even when you're bluffing. But I'd seen this move before. Tony Castellanos had tried the same tactic in 2003, showing up to my office with architectural plans for modifications to a property he didn't yet own. Tony had learned an expensive lesson about the difference between confidence and ownership rights. Kelly was about to learn the same lesson. I deleted her message and set the phone aside. My mind was clicking through possibilities now, the same methodical process I'd used to turn a small contracting business into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. Resources, timeline, desired outcome, acceptable risks. Resources, substantial financial assets, legal representation, 30 years of business relationships, and one crucial advantage Kelly didn't know about, my neighbor Derek's technical expertise. Derek owed me a favor from last winter when I'd helped him deal with a flooding issue in his basement. Timeline, 6 days to implement, Sunday execution. Desired outcome, complete reversal of Kelly's power position, not just stopping her theft, but ensuring she understood the consequences of treating me like a victim. The clock read 1:23 a.m. when I finally smiled in the darkness. Elizabeth used to say I had a ruthless streak that emerged when someone pushed me too far. She'd seen it with competitors who'd tried to undercut my bids through questionable tactics, with suppliers who'd attempted to breach contract terms. You're too nice 95% of the time, she'd told me once, but that other 5% is absolutely terrifying. Kelly had never seen that 5%. She was about to get a masterclass. By 2 in the morning, the basic framework was solid. Tomorrow I'd approach Derek about the technical aspects. Wednesday I'd finalize details with Marcus. Thursday and Friday for preparation and positioning. Saturday night, I'd drive up to Lake Tahoe one final time, as the accommodating father Kelly expected me to be. Sunday morning would bring a very different Fred Martinez to the villa, one she'd never met before. Tuesday morning brought the clarity that only decisive action can provide. I woke at 7 feeling more energized than I had in months, showered, made coffee, and walked over to Derek's house at exactly 9 o'clock. My neighbor answered the door in his usual work-from-home uniform, faded jeans and a Silicon Valley startup t-shirt. Behind wire-rimmed glasses, his eyes held the slightly unfocused look of someone who'd been staring at code for hours. "Fred, everything okay?" Derek stepped aside, gesturing me into his home office where 3 monitors displayed lines of programming text. "Actually, I need your help with a creative technical project." I settled into the chair beside his desk, noting the impressive array of gadgets and cables that filled every surface. Derek's eyebrows lifted with immediate interest. "What kind of project? You've definitely got my attention." "Home automation, something involving motion sensors, voice assistants, maybe some lighting effects." I paused, watching his reaction. A surprise for some unexpected guests. "Oh, this sounds fascinating." Derek swiveled his chair to face me fully, like a haunted house setup, smart home integration with theatrical elements. Close enough. Exactly. The kind of thing that would really make an impression. Derek's grin was infectious. Fred, this sounds like something from a horror movie. When do we start? 2 hours later, we were loading Derek's SUV with enough technology to outfit a small research facility. Motion detectors, programmable LED light strips, wireless speakers, hidden cameras, water flow controllers, and a tablet loaded with home automation software. The drive to Lake Tahoe flew by as Derek explained the possibilities. We can program cascading responses. Motion triggers lights. Lights trigger voice responses. Voice responses trigger water systems. The whole house becomes an interactive experience. How sophisticated can we make it? Sky's the limit. I'm thinking motion sensors in every room. Voice assistant programmed with custom messages. Lighting that responds to movement patterns. Derek was practically bouncing in his seat. We could even add facial recognition if you want to target specific guests. Interesting. Let's start with the basics and see how much time we have. We reached the villa just after noon. Derek whistled appreciatively as we pulled into the driveway. Beautiful place, Fred. Your mysterious guests are going to get quite a welcome. The installation process revealed Derek's true expertise. Within minutes, he'd mapped out sensor placement throughout the villa, identified optimal camera angles, and begun programming the tablet that would control everything. Motion detector here in the entryway, he explained, mounting a device no larger than a smoke alarm. The moment someone walks in, it triggers the living room lights to start this strobing pattern, while the voice assistant announces, "You are not the owners of this house. Leave immediately." And if they don't leave? Derek's eyes gleamed. Phase 2. Motion in the living room triggers every faucet and shower in the house to turn on full blast. Plus, the voice messages get more emphatic. We worked steadily through the afternoon. Derek ran cables behind baseboards, programmed response sequences, and tested each component with the precision of someone who genuinely loved technical challenges. I assisted where I could, amazed by the sophistication of what we were creating. The beauty of this system, Derek said, adjusting a hidden camera behind a bookshelf, is that it's completely legal. Motion-activated lighting, voice assistants, automated water systems, all standard smart home features, just creatively programmed. By 3 o'clock, every room contained at least 2 motion sensors connected to lighting effects that would strobe and flash in patterns Derek described as deeply unsettling. The voice assistant had been programmed with increasingly aggressive messages, triggered by continued motion detection. Water systems throughout the house would activate randomly after the initial motion trigger. Let's test it, Derek suggested, tablet in hand. Walk into the living room. I stepped through the entryway. Immediately, lights began flashing in a disorienting pattern, while the voice assistant proclaimed, "This property belongs to Fred Martinez. You are trespassing. Leave now." Derek appeared beside me, grinning broadly. "Keep moving around." After 30 seconds of continued motion, every light in the house began strobing, while the voice changed to, "Warning! Security system activated. Authorities have been notified. Vacate immediately." The sound of rushing water echoed from the kitchen and bathrooms as faucets turned on automatically. "Brilliant," I said, genuinely impressed. "Absolutely brilliant." Derek shut down the test sequence, looking enormously pleased with himself. The system has battery backup, so they can't just flip the main breaker. And everything's controlled remotely through your phone. You can monitor the cameras, adjust settings, even activate manual overrides. As we packed up our tools, Derek's curiosity finally got the better of him. "So, when exactly are these mysterious guests arriving?" "Sunday morning. And they're really not expecting this?" I thought about Kelly's text message arranging movers for my property. Let's just say they're planning to make themselves very comfortable in my home. Derek's laughter echoed across the empty villa. "Well, they're definitely going to get a warm welcome." Wednesday morning brought Derek to my door at 8:30, arms full of equipment I hadn't seen the day before. His eyes sparkled with the fervor of someone who'd spent the night dreaming up improvements to an already impressive system. "I had some ideas," he announced, hefting a compact projector and speaker array. "What if they try to shut off the main power?" "Good question. One I'd been mulling over during my own restless night. What do you suggest? Industrial batteries, hidden in the basement, enough juice to run everything for a week. Derek's grin was infectious. Plus, I brought projectors for wall effects, dancing shadows, moving figures. This is going to be legendary. The drive to Lake Tahoe passed quickly as Derek outlined his enhancements. Motion-triggered projections of ghostly silhouettes, sound systems that would whisper from hidden speakers throughout the house, backup power supplies that would make the villa virtually impossible to shut down. Your mysterious guests, Derek said as we pulled into the villa's driveway, are going to think they've walked into a haunted house movie. Perfect. We worked with focused intensity throughout the morning. Derek installed projectors in the main rooms, programming them to cast moving shadows across walls and ceilings. The effect, even in daylight, was genuinely unsettling. Dark figures that seemed to pace behind the furniture, shapes that flickered just beyond peripheral vision. The beauty of this setup, Derek explained while calibrating a wall-mounted unit, is psychological impact. The human brain tries to find patterns in random stimuli. These projections will make them see things that aren't really there. Meanwhile, I focused on the audio enhancement. Derek had brought professional-grade speakers, barely larger than smoke detectors, which he positioned throughout every room. The sound library he'd assembled was impressively disturbing. Footsteps in empty hallways, whispered voices, creaking floorboards, wind that seemed to blow through closed windows. The system will layer these sounds randomly, Derek noted, fine-tuning the audio levels. Sometimes just one effect, sometimes multiple sounds overlapping. Keeps them guessing what's real. By noon, we'd transformed the peaceful villa into something that belonged in a psychological thriller. The backup battery system, cleverly hidden beneath the main electrical panel, would ensure uninterrupted operation regardless of attempts to disable the power supply. What about a warning sign? I suggested as we paused for lunch. Something to set the right tone when they arrive. Derek's eyes lit up. Brilliant. How about welcome to the house of the future? Enter at your own risk. Makes it sound like some kind of tech demonstration. We spent an hour crafting the perfect sign, professional-looking, mounted prominently on the front door. To casual observers, it would suggest an elaborate smart home showcase. To our unwelcome visitors, it would provide fair warning of what awaited inside. The afternoon was devoted to comprehensive testing and final calibration. Derek walked through each room while I monitored the control tablet, watching as motion sensors triggered cascading responses across every system simultaneously. Motion detected in entryway, Derek called out. Lights activating, projection system engaging, audio sequence starting. The villa erupted into controlled chaos. Strobe lights pulsed in disorienting patterns, while ghostly shadows danced across walls. The voice assistant announced its stern warning about trespassing, while eerie whispers seemed to emanate from empty corners. Water began flowing from faucets and showers throughout the house. How long will this sequence run? I asked, genuinely impressed by the coordination, continuously while motion is detected, with 30-second intervals if they try to hide or stay still. Derek beamed with professional pride. The system assumes anyone remaining inside is either authorized or stubborn. It adjusts accordingly. We conducted final tests in every room, ensuring seamless integration between all components. The projectors synchronized perfectly with sound effects. Motion sensors covered every possible path through the house. The backup power systems remained invisible, yet accessible for maintenance. As evening approached, Derek made final adjustments to the smartphone interface that would allow me to monitor everything remotely. Live camera feeds, system status updates, manual override controls, complete operational command from anywhere with internet access. This is honestly the most sophisticated home automation project I've ever worked on, Derek said, packing his tools with obvious reluctance to leave his masterpiece. Your guests are going to get the surprise of their lives. Standing in the doorway, I surveyed our handiwork one final time. The villa looked exactly as it always had, peaceful, welcoming, serene. But beneath that familiar surface lay a technological web that would respond to unwelcome visitors with relentless, inescapable intensity. Thank you, Derek. This is absolutely perfect. Derek's laughter echoed across the empty villa as we locked up and headed to our cars. I almost feel sorry for whoever shows up here Sunday. Almost. Sunday, May 4th, the day Kelly had chosen for her final victory. I positioned myself in my study at 2 o'clock sharp, 3 monitors glowing with camera feeds from the villa. The peaceful afternoon at Lake Tahoe looked deceptively serene through the high-definition lenses Derek had installed throughout my property. Birds moved between pine trees. Sunlight sparkled on the lake's surface. No hint of the technological web waiting beneath the villa's innocent facade. My phone lay beside the keyboard, its screen showing the home automation app that controlled every system Derek and I had so carefully integrated. Motion sensors, armed. Audio systems, ready. Lighting arrays, programmed. Water controls, activated. Projection systems, loaded with their unsettling choreography. Everything had tested perfectly during our Wednesday completion run. Now came the real performance. At 2:28 p.m., a dark blue minivan appeared on the approach road camera, exactly as Kelly had promised. My daughter's punctuality had always been one of her more reliable traits, useful in school, devastating in manipulation, and perfect for revenge planning. Right on schedule, I murmured, adjusting the monitor angle for optimal viewing. The vehicle pulled into my driveway with casual confidence, as if the occupants owned every stone in the path. Kelly emerged from the passenger side first, her dark hair catching the afternoon light as she stretched and surveyed what she clearly believed was now her family's property. Palmer climbed out from behind the wheel, already moving to help his parents with their luggage. Carl and Margaret Thompson looked exactly as I'd imagined. Retirement-aged, slightly weathered, but moving with the eager anticipation of people who'd just received an unexpected gift. Margaret clutched a large purse and what appeared to be house slippers, ready to make herself comfortable in someone else's home. They gathered at the back of the minivan, unloading suitcases and boxes with the efficiency of a permanent relocation. Not a weekend visit, not a temporary arrangement, a complete takeover of my villa, executed with the casual confidence of people who believed their victim was too weak to resist. Kelly pointed toward the front entrance, speaking animatedly to her in-laws. Even through the camera, her body language radiated triumph and authority. Palmer nodded along, occasionally glancing up at the villa's windows, as if mentally cataloging which rooms his parents might prefer. They approached my front door as a unified group, 4 people absolutely certain of their right to claim my property. Margaret walked slightly ahead of the others, her posture suggesting someone prepared to take charge of household arrangements immediately. Then they reached the warning sign. Derek's professionally mounted placard stood prominently beside the entrance. "Welcome to the house of the future. Enter at your own risk." The lettering was clear, the message unmistakable, the warning legally sufficient. Margaret stopped first, her face darkening as she read the sign. Her voice carried clearly through the audio pickup Derek had positioned near the entrance. "What is this nonsense? Who put this ridiculous thing up?" Carl joined her, squinting at the sign with obvious irritation. "Probably some prankster kid." "Just ignore it, Maggie." Kelly's laughter was sharp and dismissive. "Oh, that's just Dad being weird. He probably thought it was funny or something. Don't worry about it at all." Palmer shrugged, already reaching for the door handle. "The old man's always been a little eccentric, right? Let's just get inside." But Margaret wasn't finished. Her face flushed with indignation as she grabbed the sign's mounting bracket and yanked it free from the wall with surprising strength. The professional installation Derek had spent an hour perfecting came apart in seconds, the placard clattering to the ground. "There," Margaret declared, kicking the fallen sign aside. "I won't have some silly warning ruining our first day in our new home." Kelly applauded. "Perfect." "You're absolutely right, Margaret. This is your house now." Through my monitors, I watched them step over the destroyed warning sign and approach my front door. 4 people who had just demonstrated complete disrespect for my property, my message, and my right to set boundaries in my own home. Fair warning given. Fair warning rejected with contempt. Palmer inserted the key Kelly had obviously provided, probably copied from the spare I'd trusted her with years ago. The lock turned smoothly, the door swung open, and my daughter led Palmer's parents across the threshold of my villa like a conquering general claiming territory. Make yourselves completely at home, Kelly announced, her voice echoing through the entryway. This place is yours now. Margaret's delighted gasp was audible through the speaker system. Oh, it's even more beautiful inside. Kelly, I can't believe how easy this was. Some people are just natural pushovers. The motion sensors registered their presence immediately, red indicators lighting up across my monitoring system. 4 targets inside the villa. Systems armed and responsive, all technological elements ready for activation. I leaned back in my leather chair, finger hovering over the smartphone screen that would begin their education in respect for other people's property. Not yet. Let them get comfortable first. 10 o'clock arrived with the precision of a Swiss timepiece. Through the bedroom camera feed, I watched Kelly and Palmer settle into sleep in what they believed was their master bedroom. The guest room monitors showed Carl and Margaret already unconscious, exhausted from their day of claiming my property. Perfect timing for their technological awakening. My finger hovered over the master activation control Derek had programmed into my smartphone. One touch would unleash every system we'd so carefully integrated throughout the villa. Motion sensors armed, audio sequences loaded, projection systems ready, water controls prepared. Time for my daughter to understand the difference between a victim and a strategist. I pressed execute. The transformation was instantaneous and magnificent. Every light in the villa began strobing in coordinated patterns, rapid flashes of red, blue, and white that turned the peaceful bedrooms into disorienting disco environments. Simultaneously, water erupted from every faucet, every shower, creating a thunderous symphony of rushing liquid throughout the house. Kelly bolted upright in bed, her silhouette visible against the chaotic lighting. Palmer scrambled beside her, both of them shouting questions that couldn't be heard over the technological assault. Then the voice assistant joined the performance. Attention! Unauthorized intrusion detected. The announcement boomed from hidden speakers throughout the villa. You are not the owners of this house. Leave the premises immediately. Through the guest room camera, I watched Carl and Margaret stumble from their bed in terror. Margaret's scream was clearly audible through the audio feed as dancing shadows began projecting across the walls, ghostly figures that seemed to gesture and move with supernatural purpose. Carl, do something! Margaret's voice cracked with panic. I don't understand what's happening, Carl replied, his words barely audible over the rushing water and strobing lights. The beauty of Derek's programming became apparent as the systems cascaded in perfect coordination. Motion sensors detected their frantic movement between rooms, triggering additional audio warnings and intensifying the visual effects. The more they ran, the more aggressive the house became. Kelly appeared in the hallway camera feed, her hair disheveled, her confident demeanor completely shattered. This is impossible. Houses don't do this. Palmer stumbled behind her, trying to reach what he thought was the main electrical panel. Where's the breaker box? We need to shut this off. But Derek's backup systems were performing flawlessly. Even if they found the electrical panel, the battery systems would maintain operation for days. The villa had become technologically autonomous, responsive only to my remote commands. Warning: security protocols activated, the voice assistant announced again. Unauthorized occupants will be removed. Margaret appeared in the living room camera, her face twisted with terror, as projector-generated shadows danced around her. This place is haunted. We have to leave. The door-locking sequence activated as Palmer reached the front entrance. Derek had programmed a 30-second delay, not long enough to trap them, but sufficient to create claustrophobic panic. Palmer yanked at the handle frantically. The doors won't open. What kind of system is this? Through my monitors, I watched 4 people who had confidently invaded my property, now reduced to terrified, confused victims of technology they couldn't understand or control. Kelly, who had dismissed me as weak and accommodating, stumbled through strobing lights while invisible speakers whispered around her. Palmer, who had planned to solve his parents' problems with my villa, couldn't even solve the mystery of a smart lock. The projection systems reached their program peak, filling every wall with moving figures that seemed to watch and follow their panicked movements. Combined with the surround sound effects, footsteps, creaking, wind that seemed to blow through closed windows, the villa had become a technological haunted house. Carl collapsed into a chair, his face pale in the flashing lights. We need to get out of here right now. I'm trying, Palmer shouted back, still struggling with the door controls. Exactly 6 hours after activation began, the automated sequence reached its crescendo. Every system operated simultaneously. Lights, water, sound, projections, and voice warnings, creating a sensory overload designed to overwhelm any rational thought process. Kelly stood in the center of the living room, turning in circles as shadows danced around her and water rushed from unseen sources. The confident woman who had ordered me off my own property now looked like a lost child in a technological nightmare. Dawn light began filtering through the windows as the door locks finally disengaged. Palmer yanked the entrance open, and all four of them stumbled toward the exit in complete psychological defeat. My phone began ringing as they reached their minivan. Kelly's name appeared on the display. The phone rang at exactly 7:30, cutting through the peaceful morning silence of my study. Kelly's name glowed on the display, and I allowed myself a small smile before answering with carefully measured concern. Kelly? Good morning, sweetheart. How was your night at the villa? Her response shattered the morning calm like breaking glass. What did you do, you sick, twisted old man? Her voice crackled with hysteria and exhaustion. Margaret and Carl are traumatized. They're barely coherent. I adjusted my tone to express gentle confusion. Kelly, what are you talking about? What happened up there? Don't you dare play innocent with me. Each word trembled with rage. The house went completely insane. Lights flashing everywhere, water pouring from every faucet, voices screaming at us to leave. Fascinating. Derek's coordination had worked even better than anticipated. That sounds absolutely terrifying, I replied, allowing genuine concern to creep into my voice. Did you call someone for help? We called the police. Kelly's voice cracked. They came out at 6 this morning, searched everything, found nothing wrong. They said it was probably just some kind of technical malfunction. Perfect. The beauty of smart home technology, completely legal, utterly deniable. Well, that's a relief, I said reasonably. At least you know there wasn't any real danger. Real danger? Kelly's scream was so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. We didn't sleep for 8 hours. Carl collapsed twice. Margaret won't stop crying. I made sympathetic clicking sounds. I'm so sorry you had such a frightening experience. These modern electronic systems can be very unpredictable. Stop mocking us. The desperation in her voice was almost musical. This wasn't some random malfunction, and we both know it. Kelly, I'm genuinely concerned about you. You sound extremely stressed. I paused, then added with perfectly calibrated innocence, maybe the house just doesn't like strangers staying there? The silence stretched for 10 seconds. When Kelly spoke again, her voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper. I know this was you. Somehow, some way you orchestrated this whole nightmare. Me? I laughed gently. Kelly, I was here in San Diego all night. How could I possibly control systems at the villa from 200 miles away? You're some kind of tech genius now, is that it? Actually, Derek was the tech genius, but I saw no reason to enlighten her about my collaborative advantages. Sweetheart, I can barely operate my television remote. You know that. Kelly's breathing grew ragged as she grappled with the impossibilities of proving her suspicions. The police said everything appeared to be functioning normally when they arrived. There you go. Must have been a power surge or something. A power surge that lasted 8 hours, that created voices and moving shadows. I allowed a note of gentle concern to enter my voice. Kelly, are you sure you didn't imagine some of these things? Stress can cause hallucinations, you know. Hallucinations? The word exploded from her throat. 4 people had the same hallucinations simultaneously? Group hysteria is a documented psychological phenomenon. Kelly's strangled sob was clearly audible through the connection. For 3 years, I'd been the one making desperate phone calls, begging for understanding, receiving dismissive responses. The symmetry was deeply satisfying. We're never coming back, she declared, trying to inject strength into her shaking voice. Never. The villa is yours. We don't want anything to do with that cursed place. That's probably wise, I agreed mildly. Sometimes houses develop personalities, especially when they feel their boundaries have been violated. You can't get away with this. Somehow we'll prove it was you. Prove what, exactly? That you had a bad night involving what the police determined was a technical malfunction? Kelly's silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the hollow quality of complete defeat. I underestimated you. You underestimated a lot of things, Kelly. This isn't over. Actually, I said quietly, I think it is. You got exactly what you asked for. A night in my villa. I hope the experience was educational. The line went dead. I sat back in my leather chair, setting the phone gently on my desk beside the still glowing monitors that showed the empty villa. 8 years of construction experience had taught me that the most elegant solutions were often the simplest ones. Kelly had wanted to take my property through psychological manipulation and emotional terrorism. I'd simply returned the favor using superior technology and strategic patience. The phone began ringing again almost immediately. Kelly's name on the display, I turned it off. Tuesday morning brought confirmation of my strategic predictions. Through the villa's camera system, I watched Palmer's rental truck pull into the driveway at 10 o'clock sharp, loaded with locksmith equipment and a confident expression that wouldn't last long. From my study in San Diego, I observed him approach the front door with professional tools, clearly believing that changing a few locks would solve their villa problem. The locksmith Palmer had hired looked skeptical, even before examining Derek's integrated security system. Within 30 minutes, both men stood scratching their heads in obvious confusion. "These aren't regular locks, sir," the locksmith's voice carried clearly through the audio pickup. "They're integrated smart home systems, biometric scanners, wireless connectivity, backup power supplies." Palmer's face darkened as he studied the sophisticated hardware. "Can't you just replace them anyway?" "Not without reprogramming the entire security network." The locksmith packed his tools with the efficiency of someone eager to leave. "That's way beyond my scope. You'd need a tech specialist who understands home automation systems." And Derek Collins was the only such specialist within 200 miles who had intimate knowledge of this particular installation. I made a mental note to thank him again for his thorough work. Palmer stood alone in my villa's entryway. After the locksmith drove away, his shoulders sagging with the weight of technical defeat. Through the camera, I watched him kick futilely at the doorframe before returning to his truck for the long drive back to San Diego. The rest of my Tuesday passed in pleasant anticipation. Kelly would receive Palmer's failure report around 4 o'clock. By evening, desperation would drive them to my doorstep for a final confrontation. 30 years of managing construction projects had taught me to recognize when opponents realized they were outmaneuvered. 8 o'clock brought the sound of car doors slamming in my driveway. Through the window, I observed Kelly and Palmer approaching my front door with the aggressive posture of people who had exhausted rational options. Kelly's first knock rattled the doorframe. "Open up! We need to talk." I opened the door calmly, noting Kelly's flushed face and Palmer's clenched fists. "Good evening. How was your day?" "Cut the innocent act." Kelly pushed past me into my entryway. "Palmer couldn't change the locks because you've turned the villa into some kind of high-tech fortress." "Smart home security is becoming quite popular," I observed mildly. "Very effective against unauthorized access." Palmer stepped closer, trying to use his height for intimidation. "Either you stop this ridiculous game and give us the villa, or forget you have a daughter." "Is that supposed to be a threat or a promise?" Kelly's eyes blazed with fury. "We'll find a way to prove your guilt in court. We'll sue you for harassment, for emotional distress, for everything." "Based on what evidence? A police report that found no illegal activity?" "You know what you did." Kelly's voice cracked with frustration. "Somehow you orchestrated that whole nightmare, and we'll prove it." I leaned against my doorframe, completely relaxed. "Prove that you experienced what the police determined was a technical malfunction?" "Good luck with that." Palmer tried a different approach. "Look, Fred, be reasonable. You're old and alone. What do you really need with such a big villa?" The exact words Kelly had used during our phone confrontation. They really had no original material. Interesting perspective from people who tried to steal my property without permission. Kelly's control finally snapped completely. "Fine. You want to play hardball? You'll never see any grandchildren. When I have kids, they'll never know their grandfather existed. You'll die alone and forgotten, just like Mom." The cruelty of invoking Elizabeth's memory should have wounded me. 3 years ago, it would have sent me into tearful apologies and desperate bargaining. Now it simply confirmed what I'd already concluded about my daughter's character, the same way you forgot to ask permission before giving away my villa. This isn't over! Kelly's voice rose to a shriek. We'll destroy you. We'll ruin your reputation, turn everyone against you. By the time we're finished, you'll wish you'd just given us the villa. Palmer nodded aggressively. She's right. We have friends, connections. We'll make your life miserable. I studied their faces with clinical detachment. Kelly, the daughter I'd raised and sacrificed for, now promising to destroy me for refusing to surrender my life's work. Palmer, the son-in-law I'd welcomed into the family, threatening social warfare because his parents couldn't steal my home. Are you quite finished? Kelly stepped closer, her face twisted with malice. We're just getting started. You have no idea what we're capable of. Actually, I had a very clear idea. Their capabilities extended to psychological manipulation, theft attempts, and vicious personal attacks. But they'd already deployed every weapon in their arsenal, and I remained standing. More importantly, they'd just provided all the justification I needed for the final solution I'd been contemplating since yesterday's phone call. Well, I said quietly, I suppose we'll see who's more capable. Something in my tone made Palmer step backward. Kelly hesitated, perhaps recognizing that her threats had achieved something she hadn't intended. We're leaving, she announced, trying to regain control of the situation. But this conversation isn't over. Actually, I replied, watching them retreat toward their car, I think it is. I closed the door and walked back to my study, where Elizabeth's photograph waited on my desk. Tomorrow I would make some phone calls. Marcus Chen first, then a few other professional contacts. Kelly thought she understood warfare. She was about to learn the difference between tactics and strategy. Wednesday morning brought the moment I'd been orchestrating since Kelly's first phone call. At 10 o'clock, I sat in Bradley Walsh's conference room, watching my daughter and her accomplices file through the door, with the aggressive confidence of people who believed they held winning cards. Bradley, my notary for 15 years, had prepared everything according to my Tuesday night instructions. Legal documents lay spread across the polished table, like evidence in a trial, which in many ways this was. Kelly took the chair directly across from me, her jaw set with determination. All right, Dad, we're here to resolve this villa situation once and for all. Palmer positioned himself beside her, arms crossed in what he probably thought was an intimidating pose. Carl and Margaret Thompson settled into chairs along the wall, their expressions mixing hope with lingering trauma from Sunday's technological experience. I appreciate everyone coming, I said calmly. Bradley has some important information to share. Kelly's eyes narrowed. Cut the formalities. We want the villa transferred to Palmer's parents immediately. No more games, no more delays. Actually, I replied, I'm afraid that's impossible. Palmer leaned forward aggressively. Nothing's impossible if you just sign the papers. We've been patient long enough. You misunderstand. I gestured to Bradley, who cleared his throat with professional precision. I no longer own the villa. The silence stretched for 10 seconds. Kelly's face began changing color. What exactly does that mean? Palmer demanded. Bradley opened the top folder on his desk. Mr. Martinez transferred ownership of the Lake Tahoe property to the Second Chance Foundation for Homeless Assistance. The transfer was completed Monday morning and is completely legal. Kelly's voice cracked like breaking glass. That's impossible. You had no right. I had every right to transfer property I owned, I said quietly. Everything is legally documented and irreversible. Palmer's confident posture collapsed. But we had an agreement. Kelly said the villa was ours. Bradley's professional tone never wavered. Mr. Martinez can only transfer property he actually owns. The foundation owns the villa now. Kelly shot to her feet, her chair scraping against the floor. You can't do this to us. We need that villa. You tried to steal it, I observed. This seemed like a more appropriate solution. Margaret Thompson's voice wavered with confusion. What does this mean for us? Where will we live? You'll have to make other arrangements, I said, just as you expected me to do when you tried to evict me from my own property. Kelly's hands trembled as she gripped the table edge. This is just spite. Pure revenge. This is justice. I met her eyes steadily. And it's permanent. Palmer's face had gone ashen as the financial implications hit him. Our plans, our future, we counted on that villa to solve our problems. Perhaps you should have asked permission before making those plans. Bradley spread additional documents across the table. The charitable transfer includes a lifetime usage clause for Mr. Martinez as the donor. He retains full access to the property until his death. Then nothing changes for you. Kelly's voice climbed toward hysteria. You still get to use it. Everything changes, I corrected. You no longer have any claim to it, ever. Carl Thompson spoke for the first time, his voice small and confused. So we get nothing? After everything? After attempting to steal my property through psychological manipulation and threats? That's correct. Kelly sank back into her chair, the fight draining from her face as the reality settled in. When did you do this? Monday morning, immediately after your technological experience. The timing hit her like a physical blow. Monday, after the villa incident but before their confrontation at my house. Every threat, every demand, every cruel word had been meaningless from the moment she'd spoken them. Palmer's voice was barely a whisper. You were always planning this. I was always planning to protect my property from people who thought they could take it through manipulation and intimidation. Kelly stared at the legal documents as though they might dissolve under her gaze. The charity thing? That's just a trick, right? Some way to maintain control? Bradley answered before I could. The Second Chance Foundation is a legitimate charitable organization. The transfer is genuine and irrevocable. So you win, Palmer said bitterly. Is that what you wanted to hear? I wanted to hear nothing from any of you. But since you insisted on this conflict, yes, I win. Kelly's composure finally cracked completely. You've destroyed our future. Palmer's parents have nowhere to go. They can go anywhere except my villa. Margaret Thompson began crying quietly. Carl patted her shoulder with the helpless gestures of a man who'd never understood how they'd arrived at this moment. Kelly stood on unsteady legs, her confident aggression replaced by hollow defeat. Come on, there's nothing left to discuss. As they filed toward the door, I called out one final observation. Kelly? She turned back, her face a mask of exhaustion and rage. Next time you try to manipulate someone, remember that business experience beats emotional terrorism. Every time. The door closed behind them with a soft click. Bradley and I sat in comfortable silence, surrounded by the legal documents that had just ended a war I'd never wanted to fight. Masterfully planned, Fred, Bradley said finally. 30 years of construction contracts taught me to always have an exit strategy. I gathered my copies of the documents and walked toward the door. Time to drive up to Lake Tahoe and enjoy my villa in complete peace. Thursday morning brought the first sunrise in 3 years that I could watch without fear, anger, or defensive calculation. I drove to Lake Tahoe through California's spring landscape, feeling something I'd almost forgotten existed. Simple contentment. The villa welcomed me with the silence of a house that belonged, once again, entirely to its rightful occupant. I used my key without checking over my shoulder, entered without listening for hostile voices, walked through rooms that held memories of recent technological warfare but felt, somehow, cleansed. My first task was restoration. Derek's cameras came down easily, their sophisticated mounting hardware yielding to basic tools and determined purpose. Motion sensors, voice assistants, projection systems, each component of our elaborate revenge theater got carefully packed into boxes for return to my helpful neighbor. Within 2 hours, the villa had returned to its natural state. No blinking lights, no hidden microphones, no technological defenses monitoring invisible approaches. Just a house by a lake, owned by a charitable foundation, occupied by a man who no longer needed to protect himself from his own family. I made coffee using the same machine that had witnessed Sunday's chaos, then carried my mug to the terrace where Elizabeth and I had shared countless peaceful mornings. The lake stretched before me, its surface reflecting the late morning sun in patterns that seemed to dance with possibility rather than threat. For the first time since my wife's death, I sat completely still. The transformation felt almost mystical in its completeness. 3 years ago, I'd been a broken widower who confused love with surrender, kindness with weakness, family loyalty with accepting abuse. The man who had built a construction empire from nothing had somehow forgotten how to protect his own boundaries. Elizabeth's voice whispered through memory, but clearer now, unfiltered by grief and manipulation. "Be patient with Kelly," she'd said. "She's processing her loss." But Elizabeth had never meant for patience to become permanent victimhood. She'd never suggested that love required accepting theft, manipulation, and psychological terrorism. The woman who'd married a determined businessman wouldn't have wanted him to become a doormat, even for their daughter. "Kindness without self-respect isn't kindness," I said aloud to the empty terrace. "It's just weakness disguised as virtue." The mountain peaks surrounding the lake seemed to nod agreement. Nature itself demonstrated boundaries. Water stayed within its shores. Mountains maintained their foundations. Seasons changed according to their own rhythms, regardless of human demands. Kelly had spent 3 years testing my boundaries, discovering they could be moved, dissolved, ignored entirely. Each successful manipulation had taught her that love meant capitulation, that family ties guaranteed unlimited access to everything I owned or earned. I'd taught her that lesson through my own behavior. Every check I'd written, every demand I'd accepted, every time I'd chosen temporary peace over lasting respect. The technological revenge had been satisfying but ultimately unnecessary. The real victory was simpler and more permanent. Learning to say no. Learning that protecting myself wasn't cruelty but health. Learning that some relationships cannot survive the introduction of genuine boundaries. My phone had remained silent for 24 hours. No frantic calls from Kelly, no threats from Palmer, no desperate attempts to find loopholes in the charitable transfer. They'd finally understood what I'd discovered in Bradley's office. The war was over, and they had lost completely. But more important than their defeat was my recovery. The grieving widower who had mistaken exploitation for love was gone. In his place sat a man who remembered his own worth, who understood that genuine kindness required strength, not weakness. Elizabeth would have been proud, not of the revenge, perhaps, but of the self-respect, of the man who had rediscovered that protecting himself was an act of love. Love for her memory, love for his own dignity, love for the possibility that relationships built on mutual respect might still exist somewhere in his future. The afternoon sun warmed my face as I finished my coffee and considered the strange mathematics of family. Kelly had calculated that emotional manipulation plus financial pressure would equal permanent access to my assets. She'd never considered that trauma plus time plus strategic thinking might equal a father who finally learned to protect himself. Lake Tahoe's eternal calm reflected a truth I was finally ready to accept. Some battles end not with reconciliation, but with the understanding that peace requires distance. Some love expresses itself through boundaries rather than surrender. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like myself again. If you liked this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.